All right. Well, thank you for attending today. My name is Amanda Ostrico, and I'm the Assistant Vice Provost and Director of Graduate Enrollment Management here at the University of Kansas. And today we have Cheyenne Queen from our Financial Aid and Scholarships Office who is going to talk to you all about funding your education for graduate study. And before Cheyenne gets started, I'm going to talk for just a minute to give just a quick overview about the different types of funding that graduate students tend to have throughout their career. And so there are really a few different buckets when it comes to funding types. And so one of them is to be employed as a graduate student. So we have graduate research assistantships, graduate teaching assistantships, and then graduate assistantships, or we call them our 3G options. And GRA positions, graduate research assistantships, are positions where students are paid to focus on their research. Graduate teaching assistantships, or GTA positions, are positions where students are paid to teach classes. And then graduate assistantships, or GAs, are assistantships where students really provide professional support to a unit. All three of these types of employment positions uh, come with a biweekly stipend. You are an employee of the institution. They also have other benefits for in-state tuition rates if you're appointed at least a 40% or higher level. And I would say a typical appointment is 50%, which 50% equates to the number of hours that you're working a week. So a 50% appointment would have an expectation for working roughly 20 hours a week, since 40 hours a week would be a 100% appointment, which we don't typically have for 3G appointments. They also come with insurance benefits. So if you're appointed at least a 50% rate, you also have access to health insurance or reduced health insurance as a graduate student. And then graduate research assistantships, GRAs and GTAs also have tuition that is sponsored as part of those appointments. And then there are some units that choose to go above and beyond and sponsor tuition for those GA appointments, but at a minimum, the 40% or higher GA appointments do have in-state tuition rates. So those are I would say, the most common forms of funding that you'll find for full-time students who are also employees while they're pursuing their studies. There are also other forms of funding that students can get at the department level. There are a number of scholarships and fellowships that are offered. And so for domestic students, completing the FAFSA, which Cheyenne will talk about a little bit, is certainly really important to have on file to make sure you're eligible for all of that type of funding. International students also have a form that they can fill out. And then there are also a lot of different sponsorships that could be available, whether that's from, for an international student. Sometimes they have different sponsorships from their country or sponsorships from an employer. So for example, like the University of Kansas, as my employer, would sponsor some of my tuition if I were to take courses. And then, of course, there are also loans and other forms of financial aid. So that's kind of the high level ways in which funding works as a graduate student. And so I'll turn it over to Cheyenne to introduce herself and to really talk through more details about all the different funding options.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, guys. My name is Cheyenne Queen, and I'm one of the financial aid counselors here at KU, as Amanda mentioned. And we work directly with students, and so we do kind of have an alpha split. So I work with students whose last names are A through E, and I work with both undergrad and graduate students. And so I may not be your direct financial aid counselor. And so you can also find your counselor on the help tab. But we are just going to kind of go over things that you want to consider when you're looking into a graduate program. So costs are a big thing. How much is this program going to cost you? The FAFSA, funding options. And so that is kind of what we're going to explore in the next 20 minutes or so. So the first thing that I think is important, especially for me when I was looking at programs and stuff, are the costs. And so we are very transparent at KU about how much it costs to come here in all programs. So we have a website, affordability.ku.edu is just our general financial aid website. And within that website, we have a costs tab. And we actually break it down between in-state, out-of-state, the different programs, because each program can have different costs associated with it or different tuition associated with it. And we'll talk about that later. But this is helpful because you can see exactly how much it's going to cost for you to come to school to KU. And on that page, it's going to be looking at things like tuition and fees, room and board if that applies to you, books and supplies, and personal transportation expenses. And all of these things combine together to create a cost of attendance or a budget for you as a student at KU. And what that means is that's really just how much it costs for you to get an education at KU. So we take direct costs, which are tuition and fees and housing that the university is going to bill you for, but we also take into account indirect costs and transportation if you're commuting to and from the university, um, personal expenses if you're needing to purchase stuff outside of books for your classes. And so all that kind of combines together, and that's how much you can have in financial aid. We do have a program as well as to be able to adjust your budget, because we're not going to take into account just right off the bat everything that may be going on in your life as a student. And so if you have other expenses that you potentially would like financial aid to help cover, we can look at different things as out-of-pocket medical costs. If you had to purchase a computer this year, and that was a big thing this year with COVID, everybody was sent home, and so that was something that was important for students to be able to purchase and be able to use. And so we can look at seeing if making that adjustment to your budget would allow you to have more in financial aid to help cover things like that. If you're living in expensive housing, we can look in seeing the housing portion that's already in your budget is accurately reflected to what you're paying. And so we can make these adjustments for you. You just have to have an appointment with one of us. And something you always want to keep in mind when you are adjusting your budget is it creates more room in your cost of attendance, but doesn't necessarily guarantee you more financial aid. So that's what we want to have the conversation with during an appointment, is exactly what you are looking at. If you were to adjust your budget, what could we give you in more financial aid? Next step for aid is always the FAFSA. Maybe the first step always for aid is the FAFSA. And this is what students will complete every year that you're studying. So whether it is first year, second year, third year, fourth year, your final year, anything like that, you're going to complete the FAFSA if you would like to be eligible for federal aid. So the FAFSA, it's very similar to an undergraduate FAFSA if you completed that, but being a graduate student, you don't have to have parental information on it anymore. So you're going to use your same FSA user ID and password. You are going to use tax information from prior year. So prior year is just a fancy way of saying 2 years ago. So whatever fall semester you're looking at starting. So if you're looking at starting in fall 2021, you're going to use 2019 tax information 2 years ago. And so you'll have your 2019 tax return if you had to file. If you didn't have to file, you'll simply state on the FAFSA that you didn't have to file your taxes. And you'll want to make sure that you have any other financial and asset information if you own a business, if you've got a lot of assets, and you want to have important things like your social security number and stuff like that so that you can file the FAFSA. Some good FAFSA tips are just to apply early and apply each year. So the FAFSA opens October 1st of the prior year. So if you're starting in fall 2021, FAFSA would open in October of 2020. So you can start filing then, and it's just always a good idea to file early because things can go wrong on the FAFSA, or mistakes can happen, or you get selected for verification and you're required to turn in paperwork for it. And so applying early just allows you to get through that and not hold up your aid or hold up your charges at KU. You always want to make sure that you're entering your name and social security exactly as they are on your social security card. I know that that can kind of seem like a duh thing, or like, duh, you have to put it exactly like it is. But it happens, mistakes happen. I will say I have probably the best example of things happening when you're trying to file the FAFSA, and I don't mind sharing it because it's my own experience. When I was doing the FAFSA for my undergraduate degree, My FAFSA just kept getting rejected and I didn't know why. And it kept saying it was a social security number issue. And I was like, I promise I'm Cheyenne Queen from Kansas. It's me. But my name was actually spelled wrong on my social security card for 18 years of my life and never knew it. So when I was applying to school, my FAFSA was being rejected because my name wasn't matching. So little things like that can happen. So then I had to create an appointment and it caused, more time. So you always want to just apply early. And you want to watch out for alerts and messages in case the FAFSA is asking you to do something, or if they notice that you made a mistake when you're entering information. Sometimes the FAFSA will let you know that. Once you file the FAFSA, the types of aid that you're looking at for funding graduate school are grants and scholarships, the three G's that Amanda had mentioned earlier, federal work study, and loans. So for grants and scholarships, this is really up to the department or the school that you're studying with as a graduate student. Sometimes there's a separate application. Sometimes the general application is your application for scholarships. So you'll always want to ask your department for more information about how they handle scholarships and see if you're eligible. Sometimes if you have an outside scholarship, so it's not affiliated with KU, they're going to require the FAFSA. So sometimes you do have to have your FAFSA on file for that. But if you know that you are just going to have a scholarship through the department and you're not interested in any of that other stuff, then maybe you wouldn't have to file a FAFSA. But once your department or school is awarding you a scholarship, they let us know and we add it to your financial aid package. Another optional grant that you can look into would be a child care grant. So if you have a child that is enrolled in child care, you can look at potentially getting a grant to help cover some of those expenses. So priority is given to EFCs of 13,000 or less, which EFCs are just the expected family contribution from the FAFSA, or that number that the FAFSA generates after you add in all that income information. So you do have to qualify. You do have to have a child younger than 5 that's not in kindergarten. And you do have to provide proof that you pay for childcare expenses. But that is an option. And that application is always online on KU scholarship portal, which is ku.academicworks.com. So you can find it there every year. Next here are the three G's, so the graduate teaching assistant, graduate research assistant, and graduate assistant. And for this, you really do want to have that conversation with your department, as Amanda had mentioned, to see kind of what percentage you may be eligible for. Once your department lets us know how they would like to award you one of these, if you are a 3G, we will add that to your financial aid package, and there's a few different ways that it can affect it. So, the first one would be, a discount or waiver is applied to your tuition based on your position. So it's applied directly to your bill. So maybe it wouldn't affect the financial aid that you're receiving. If you have a certain amount, maybe it's going to lower the amount of a loan that you can take out. And then maybe it affects a scholarship that you can have because we can only award you up to your cost of attendance. So all of those will combine together. And so your department is the best place to ask those questions to, because they can directly tell you how much you're looking for, and they really just let us know when to award you. Other scholarships that you can look into are listed on our website. So on our specific website, we have a scholarships tab, and it goes over the KU scholarship portal. It goes over some optional housing scholarships, as well as staff dependent scholarships that are out here at KU, and then private/outside scholarships, which are going to be scholarships through loan lenders or community organizations or nonprofits. And so there's a lot of different scholarships listed on there. And one of the more popular outside scholarship links is probably fastweb.com. And it is one that just does a really good job of filtering scholarships for students. And so you can put in there that you're going to be a graduate student in your first year. This is what you're studying, and it's going to filter out all of the scholarships that you may not qualify for. That way you don't have to search through all of them. Graduate admissions also has a very good funding sources page on their website at graduate.ku.edu/funding_sources. So you can look there as well. Loan options that we're looking into are different, two different federal type loans and one private loan. So the first federal loan that all students are going to qualify for based on filing the FAFSA is an unsubsidized direct loan. So as a graduate student, you're eligible to borrow up to $20,500 for the academic year. So this includes fall, spring, and summer. KU is a summer trailer school, which means that our summer is tied to the end of our school year. And so within this 20,500, you would have fall 2021, spring 2022, and summer 2022 to use that full 20,500. There is a aggregate limit or a lifetime limit on this loan, so you're not able to borrow more than 138,500. And so any loans that you had during your undergraduate career, if you had an unsubsidized loan or a subsidized student loan, those count in that 138,500 aggregate limit. And so those will combine. They have an interest rate of a 4.3 for this year. They may be a little bit different for the fall 2021 academic year. So they are usually decided over the summer. And so it may be a little bit higher. We did see a decrease in interest rates for student loans because of COVID. So it is up to the government whether or not, at this point they're going to keep them low or if they're going to raise them again. I think it went from a 7% loan interest to a 4.3% interest. So probably will be somewhere in there for this next year. Like I mentioned, you do have to file the FAFSA for this. You do have to complete a master promissory note, which is just your contract that states that you're going to pay this loan back once you graduate from your program or you drop out of your program. And you've got a 6-month grace period once again after you graduate, before you have to start making payments on this loan. And if you have had undergraduate loans and you're currently in repayment for those, when you start a graduate program, those will go back into deferment. And so all of your loans would be deferred, while you would be studying in school. The next loan option that you can look into would be a graduate plus loan. So when you were an undergraduate student, you may potentially have had a plus loan, which is a parent loan, and it was in your parent's name. When you become a graduate student, it's no longer in your parent's name, but it could be in your name as a student. And so this loan is not guaranteed to every single student. The graduate plus loan does have a credit check that is involved with it. So you do have to have good credit, no adverse credit history. But if you are approved for this loan, you could have it up to your cost of attendance combined with any other aid. And there is no lifetime limit for this loan. So you can have as much of a graduate plus loan as you would like over your graduate career, just as long as you are not awarded above your budget as a KU student. Once again, you do have to create a master promissory note. There is entrance counseling. So if a student has never taken out a graduate plus loan before, it does have you do some counseling just so you can learn a little bit more about it. And while the $20,500 loan is deferred while you're in school, the graduate plus loan is not automatically deferred while you're studying in school. That is a question on the application that you can click. But right off the bat, it would be, kind of requiring payment once you're in the school year. So that is something that you want to look into when you're looking at these federal loan options versus private loan options, which we'll talk about next. You really want to look at the difference in interest rates and whether or not the loan is good for you. So the first private loan option that we have at KU is a KU endowment loan. So the endowment office here at KU created a student loan program to help students with smaller balances so that they wouldn't have to go, get a private loan somewhere else for a very small amount. And so these loans are awesome because they're deferred while you're in school at KU. So they follow kind of the federal guidelines for loans pretty closely. You are allowed to have 6,000 per academic year and up to 12,000 with them. So this is not anything that's going to be a big amount. So if you're needing a good chunk of private loans, KU Endowment won't necessarily be the best loan for you, but if you're needing a small amount, you definitely want to go with KU Endowment if you're able to. It's got a lower interest rate than most other private loans. It will require a cosigner unless you meet specific income information. So if you make over $25,000 a year, you may not require a cosigner, otherwise you would. And if you just want to find more information about this loan program, you just go to the KU Endowment website and they have it listed there. The last loan option here would be private loans. So these are going to be loans that are through loan lenders, banks, credit unions, anywhere that's offering a private student loan. And this would be the last option that I would look into unless you have a really good deal on a student private loan. If you've been a member of a bank for a long time and there are great perks to having a private student loan through them, this may be the loan that you want to look into. Typically, it just is not as good as a federal loan because it's not deferred. That's really what it's going to come down to is the deferment while you're in school. And so these are always going to require a credit check. They may require a cosigner, and these are going to blend with any other aid that you've had up to your cost of attendance once again. A good timeline for aid. We are able to disperse aid 10 days before the semester begins. So 10 days before fall classes, 10 days before spring classes, 10 days before summer classes. We're not able to disperse earlier than that. That is a federal rule. So we can award you, the previous year for the next year, but it won't disperse until we're closer to the start of each semester. Any aid that you have, the 3Gs, loans, scholarships, it's all going to go directly towards your KU bill. So it will not be anything that is mailed to you and then you are responsible for paying your bill. It is an automatic process. And if you borrow any excess, it will be refunded to you, whether you have set up a direct deposit account with the university or you would prefer a paper check. One way or another, those excess funds would come back to you and you were able to use those excess funds for whatever you would like. Some people use those excess funds for off-campus housing. Some people will save it and use it for future years. Um, Refunds typically take like a few days. It's usually a week about to process it. So when we disperse aid 10 days prior to the start of classes, it usually is only about a week. So usually about 3 days before classes start, you can look at that refund if you're eligible for one. And then just like I'd mentioned for direct deposit, it's usually the quicker way to do refunds just because it goes right into your bank account and you don't have to worry about a paper check being mailed to your house. Some important things to consider just for financial aid. There are certain things that we have to look at for students. And so you do have to be a half-time enrolled student. And so for most graduate programs, that's 5 hours. It can be a little bit different if you're one of the 3Gs. And so you want to make sure that you're watching your enrollment and seeing if you are enrolled half-time all the way. Otherwise, you're not eligible for those federal loans. Graduate students do need to maintain certain GPAs and completion rates within their classes. So as a KU graduate student, to be eligible for financial aid, you are required to maintain a 3.0 or higher in your GPA. And that is just strictly your KU GPA. So if you have transfer credits as a graduate student, those don't apply there. It's just looking at your KU GPA needs to stay above a 3.0. And then you do need to make sure that you're completing at least 67% of the classes that you're attempting here at KU. And so that just looks at classes that you started versus classes that you finished. And you're just required to stay above 67% of that to be eligible for federal aid. If something happens, because life, and this past year we've learned a lot about life and things that can happen, there's an appeals process that you can speak with counselors about. If you have a medical issue or you are having to drop out for personal reasons, there is an appeals process that we can talk about to see if you can be approved for federal aid. And if so, then you get put on certain standards to meet each semester until you're meeting those standards again. And just that you must file that FAFSA every year that you want to receive aid, unless you know you don't want federal aid, and then you do not have to. But that is basically all the funding options at KU. So I will open it to questions if you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Cheyenne. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now while we go into the question and answer section.